What does the Epic of Gilgamesh, a legendary story that was written more than 4,000 years ago, teach you about happiness, success, immortality, and even why life is worth living? In this video, you will learn all the timeless and eternal lessons that this age-old tale can teach you about becoming a more content and humane person. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a story about a king who seeks immortality because he's terrified of death. This king, King Gilgamesh, seeks immortality in two ways. Firstly, Gilgamesh attempts to become immortal through eternal fame, which he hopes to achieve by way of his great heroic deeds. Gilgamesh hopes that fame will make the memory of his existence unerasable from the memory of future generations, thus making Gilgamesh an eternal presence in human memory. In other words, Gilgamesh seeks to never be forgotten. Then, Gilgamesh tries to literally become immortal, that is, he seeks eternal life itself. However, since us humans were made to die and especially to be forgotten, Gilgamesh's search for immortality fails, or at least mostly so. Even though Gilgamesh's adventure doesn't turn out the way he initially plans, his journey teaches us lessons that were valuable 4,000 years ago, but that are also valuable today, and without a doubt will be valuable 4,000 years from now. And I'd like to share some of these lessons with you. Success won't save you. In seeking legendary adventures around the world, Gilgamesh tries to achieve such astounding success and fame that the memory of his existence will never be forgotten by future generations, thus making Gilgamesh, in a way, immortal. An example of this type of fame-seeking adventure is when Gilgamesh, accompanied by his loyal squire and best friend Enkidu, destroys the legendary cedar forest of Mesopotamian mythology, which houses a number of gods and is protected by an ogre called Humbaba. This Humbaba is a kind of giant guardian covered by 7 divine auras for protection. Yes, this man has aura, and it's 7 of them. So, to destroy the cedar forest and attain eternal fame and glory, Gilgamesh and Enkidu must also destroy Humbaba, and that's exactly what they do. Obviously, the Mesopotamian gods are not one bit happy about this, since Gilgamesh's action is a direct challenge to their sovereignty and desires. So, as a way to punish Gilgamesh's undue ambition, the gods curse Enkidu, Gilgamesh's favorite person, with a fatal disease. Therefore, the universe shows Gilgamesh that, as a human, his search for immortality through success and fame is misguided, since eternal fame and eternal life are only reserved for the gods, while oblivion and death are reserved for us, humans. In trying to achieve eternal fame and consequently eternal life, Gilgamesh tries to deny the temporal and transitory essence of our human existence, which is necessarily limited by the time we spend alive on Earth. So everything that has to do with us, whether it be the impact of our actions or our lives themselves, is tied to a rather short expiry date, since we are and always will be temporal beings. Therefore, there is no legendary adventure or astounding success that can garner the eternal fame that Gilgamesh so ardently seeks, because the impact of our actions is limited by the same factor that limits our lives: time. So Gilgamesh's search for immortality through success is a failure precisely because he wrongly believes that his success in life can shield him from that which is most painful in being a person. However, it doesn't matter if Gilgamesh becomes the most successful person of all time. He will always be human, and therefore he will always be vulnerable to that which makes being human painful. Basically, the Epic of Gilgamesh teaches us that, like our lives, the impact of our actions is limited by time, and that any attempt to deny the temporal essence of being human results in pain. After all, in trying to achieve eternal glory, Gilgamesh only destroys, whether that be the legendary cedar forest, the life of his best friend Enkidu, or his own inner peace. This story also shows us that success is incapable of protecting us from the pain of being human, which involves, for instance, the awareness that one day we are going to pass away and be forgotten, no matter how good or successful we were in life. So that Gilgamesh can finally become content with the one life that he has, rather than pining away after the eternal life he can never attain, Gilgamesh will have to accept his humanity with all its pains and terrors. However, until then, Gilgamesh has a lot to learn: why life is worth living. In case no one's told you yet, living is very hard. Living is so hard that many times it's almost impossible to find one measly reason that justifies the pain of living. However, the Epic of Gilgamesh suggests why life may be worth living after all. Sick, agonizing with pain, and about to die in his deathbed, Enkidu, who has been cursed with a fatal disease thanks to Gilgamesh's reckless immortality hunting, regrets ever becoming human. The thing about Enkidu is that he hasn't always been a normal human like you and me. Not exactly. Enkidu wasn't born of a mother, but instead was created by the gods from a pinch of clay. The gods create Enkidu precisely so that he can act as a divine tool in rechanneling Gilgamesh's violence towards more productive means, such as killing monsters. It so happens that at the beginning of the story, Gilgamesh uses all his energy to make the life of the people of Uruk, the city he's responsible for as king, much worse. So at the request of the people of Uruk, the gods create a best friend for Gilgamesh, so that hopefully Gilgamesh can become a better person and king by using his energy towards something that is not victimizing civilians, which Enkidu will help him do. So after creating Enkidu, the gods place him in the wild, where Enkidu grows up like any other animal. Therefore, Enkidu has no human contact throughout his entire youth, which means that he thinks and lives like an animal for many years. However, when Enkidu becomes fully humanized and civilized because a hunter lures him to life in society, Enkidu develops human reason and self-consciousness, which are traits that inevitably makes us completely aware of our mortality. So while Enkidu did not fear death when he lived like an animal because he wasn't fully conscious of his mortality, Enkidu, as a civilized person, is deathly afraid of dying, precisely because he's fully aware of his mortality. The Epic of Gilgamesh shows us that it is this fear of death that makes dying so painful for Enkidu, and by extension for all of us. So in his final hours of life, Enkidu bitterly regrets ever becoming human, precisely because it is his humanity that is responsible for the all-encompassing fear of death that makes dying such an awful experience for him. However, the sun god known as Shamash, who watches over Enkidu during his final hours of life, reminds Enkidu that it is only because of his humanity that he could have formed that which is most important to him, his friendship with Gilgamesh. So in the same way that Enkidu's humanity curses him with the awareness of mortality, Enkidu's humanity also is a blessing for him, since it is responsible for his relationship with Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh teaches us that the pain and joy of being a human are inseparable because they spring from the same source, our human condition as rational and self-conscious beings. So Enkidu cannot have the light of human love without the darkness of human awareness of death. And it is precisely in considering the love he bears for Gilgamesh that makes Enkidu accept his humanity and ultimately his death. When Enkidu considers that it is only thanks to his humanity that he can love Gilgamesh, living, suffering, and dying as a human become insignificant tiny specks of dust overshadowed by the human bliss of love for others. The Epic of Gilgamesh shows us that though life can be, and many times is, quite awful, going through the awfulness of life with people you love can make that awfulness just a little bit less awful, to the point that going through that awfulness may be worth going through. It's funny how upon watching Enkidu finally die, Gilgamesh says, "My friend whom I love has turned to clay." Like I mentioned before, Enkidu was made by the gods from a pinch of clay. So Enkidu technically has always been clay. He has always been made of flesh and bone. However, that doesn't seem to be how Gilgamesh perceives his best friend. Because Gilgamesh loves his friend so much, Enkidu becomes to him more than mere clay, more than mere flesh. So the Epic of Gilgamesh teaches us that our love for people can magically elevate them in our perceptions until they become more than they inevitably are, clay. Death, however, reminds Gilgamesh that not only his best friend has always been clay, but so has he, and now he has to deal with that harsh reality. How to be happy? Enkidu's tragic demise brings to the fore how terrifying death is to Gilgamesh, who now spends all his days having existential crises. This fear of death becomes so overpowering that Gilgamesh, to escape his mortal destiny, now decides to seek for immortality, literally. To carry out this simple task, Gilgamesh looks for the only mortal to have ever become immortal, so that this person can teach Gilgamesh how to never die. This immortal mortal is known as Atrahasis. Atrahasis became immortal by surviving a worldwide flood that the gods had sent a while back to wipe out all of humanity. So Gilgamesh hopes that this Atrahasis will teach him how to become immortal. However, Atrahasis tells Gilgamesh that because the circumstances that made him immortal, that is, the wiping out of all humankind, behind by way of a murderous flood will never repeat themselves, Gilgamesh can never become immortal in the same way that Atrahasis did. Therefore, Atrahasis suggests that Gilgamesh forgets any type of immortality dreams that he has and instead embraces the transience of human life. Only then can Gilgamesh become truly content, because he won't be chasing after what he can never have, that is immortality, and instead will attend to the only thing he has, his one precious human life. In another version of this story, a character called Shiduri not only teaches Gilgamesh that life is inevitably short, but that Gilgamesh must enjoy it while he has it. So Shiduri tells Gilgamesh, "The eternal life you seek, you shall never find. When the gods created humankind, they assigned death to people and kept life for themselves. But you, Gilgamesh, enjoy your life day and night. Dance and have fun day and night. Look at the child who holds your hand. Let your wife enjoy your repeated embraces." In this passage, the Epic of Gilgamesh teaches us that, unlike what Gilgamesh himself thought so far, the meaning of human life doesn't come from accomplishing great feats, such as killing legendary monsters, but instead it comes from the enjoyment of the basic pleasures of everyday existence. Therefore, Gilgamesh, rather than being occupied with epic adventures and immortality, must learn how to value that which is small so that he can finally find contentment. It is only by accepting and embracing the smallness of human life that Gilgamesh can recalibrate his goals so that they are attainable by a normal, happy person. And it is precisely this attitude that Gilgamesh adopts at the end of the story, which finally brings peace and meaning to his life. So the Epic of Gilgamesh, in telling a story about a person who seeks immortality, teaches us that the only way towards human happiness involves accepting our mortality, or in other words, our humanity, and all the possibilities that it offers and limits that it imposes. How to be immortal. So at the end of the story, Gilgamesh finally accepts his humanity and returns home to live as a normal person. However, Gilgamesh, in a way, does achieve the immortality he so ardently sought for in an accidental way. Gilgamesh becomes immortal precisely because his adventures and journeys became immortalized in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which keeps the memory of this character's existence almost 5,000 years after he supposedly lived. So the Epic of Gilgamesh, in telling the story of how Gilgamesh learns he can never be immortal, ironically immortalizes Gilgamesh. Therefore, Gilgamesh becomes immortal for having vulnerably embodied the most human drama of all, that is, our relationship with the fact that we are not immortal. So Gilgamesh, by being profoundly and unnegotiably human, becomes immortal. So the Epic of Gilgamesh teaches us that which can infuse our small human lives with so much meaning that, for instance, we can become immortal like Gilgamesh, is the brave, honest, and vulnerable confrontation of our biggest fears, whether that be mortality or anything else. This way, not only do we learn how to live, but most importantly, we also learn how to die. The final lesson of the always human Gilgamesh belongs to us, humans of future generations, who learn with the king of Uruk that the best we can do is to be just as much of a human as he is. So this is the Epic of Gilgamesh. In case you've enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing to the channel, because here we are going to explore history's most incredible stories, apply them to our lives, and learn from them what they have to teach about how to lead a life of beauty and meaning. Literature, mythology, history, and religion are tools through which we can train the meaning-seeking mechanism in our brains, so that by spending time in seeking the meaning of stories, we become better equipped to find meaning in our own lives. Rest in peace, forever young Gilgamesh. You would have loved to use Botox.